Welcome to the Congregation of Yahweh. We're here on Yahweh's Sabbath day. Greetings to those on the internet. We hope you enjoy and benefit from the messages that go out. Today's message is entitled, Did the Messiah or His Followers Change the Father's Word? And if you were to ask that question in some of the mainstream religious circles, did the Messiah change the Word? Did He change the law? Did Paul change anything? Did any of His followers? 9 out of 10 or more would say, of course. Of course it was changed. He changed. I've actually heard someone say, He changed everything. And you can take little pieces of the New Testament, a verse here, a verse there, and try to come up with that, but there's nothing plain in there that says He did away with everything, He changed everything. And there is one verse that can easily be misconstrued, and that's in Hebrews chapter 7. I'm going to start there, and we're going to find here that there is a group in the Messianic Scriptures, in the New Testaments, that claimed that the Messiah and His followers did change things. And we're going to find out the results on that here in a few minutes. But I'm going to go to this one verse. We'll start in chapter 7. Hebrews chapter 7, starting in verse 11. If therefore perfection were by the Levitical priesthood, under it the people received the law, what further need was there that another priest should arise after the order of Melchizedek and not be called after the order of Aaron? For the priesthood being changed, there is made of necessity a change also of the law. That's the only verse that seems plain and clear to point in that direction. But what it's actually saying is, if the Messiah was not of the lineage of Levi, the law would have to change, because the law said the priest had to be from Levi. So if he was a Levitical priest, which he was not, the law would have to change. And it has nothing to do with doing away with, fulfilling Torah, or anything like that. It's plainly saying, if he were a priest, the law would have to change, because the law says it has to come from Levi. Now, let's go over to John chapter 11. And as we read through the Gospels, we see that the Messiah is against the grain of the religious leaders. They don't agree with Him. They don't like Him. And they're envious of His supporters, or people that believe in Him or follow after Him. They did not want to lose their standing as the leaders. And there's a big confusion out there in the mainstream as the difference between the Creator's law, His Torah, and the rabbinical traditional law. There's a big difference. Yes, He was against the grain of rabbinical traditional law, but He never at one point broke His Father's law, commandments, the Torah. He didn't break it, and He never spoke against it. But there was a group that said He did. And that same group is still out there today. And they don't realize it. And that's the purpose of this message, is to take this message to the masses out there, that they're doing the same thing that this group did. They're bearing false witness against the Messiah and His followers, saying that He changed something when He didn't. He couldn't. He didn't have the authority to do so. His only responsibility, according to the Scriptures, was to come and speak the Word. Not change it, not alter it, not do away with it, or tell other people it didn't apply to them. It was to come and speak the Word. So, starting in John chapter 11, in verse 45. Then many of the Jews which came to Mary and had seen the things which Yeshua did believed on him. But some of them went their ways to the Pharisees and told them what things Yeshua had done. Then gathered the chief priests and the Pharisees a council and said, What do we? What are we going to do? For this man does many miracles. If we let him thus alone, all men will believe on him. And the Romans shall come and take away both our place and our nation. That's what they feared from this man. They were afraid that he was going to take over. They would lose their authority, and they would also lose their nation, their place. They thought that he was technically going to fulfill the prophecies, which they were mistaken about. And one of them, named Caiaphas, being the high priest that same year, said unto them, You know nothing at all, nor consider that it is expedient for us that one man should die for the people, and that the whole nation perish not. And this spake he not of himself, but being high priest that year, he prophesied that Yeshua should die for that nation. What's amazing here is he didn't know what he was saying. He meant it one way, but the Spirit was causing him to prophesy that the Messiah was about to die for the nation of Israel. And not for that nation only, but that also he should gather together in one the children of Elohim that were scattered abroad. That verse ties in very well with the scriptures about the regathering of Israel and the two groups into one, and that's actually a different message. But let's go into the lives of some of the Messiah's followers. Let's go over here to Acts chapter 6. And if you read every gospel account, as the Messiah was being turned over to the religious leaders after being betrayed by Judas, in just about every account it says they were looking for witnesses to testify against him, and they found none. No one's testimony agreed. And then the only thing they could come up with is somebody said, I heard him say that if you destroy this temple in 3 days, I'll raise it up. And it's actually explained there that he was talking about the temple of his body. And another witness said that he called himself or made himself the Son of Yahweh. And he actually said, they struck him, they hit him, and he said, if I've spoken anything evil, testify of what I have said. No response. They could not, if he actually spoke against Moses or the prophets or said to disregard any of the Torah, that would have been the time to speak up. He said, I taught openly in the synagogues. I said nothing in secret. What do you testify against me? Nothing. So if the Messiah spoke against Torah, wouldn't that be a perfect time to say, he spoke against Moses? He spoke against the Torah? He told us that we didn't have to keep the Torah? Wouldn't that be the best time to speak on it when he was on trial? And according to their own scriptures in Deuteronomy 13, if someone was to draw you away from the commandments or lead you after other deities, that one needs to be stoned. They didn't do it. So if he spoke against Torah, that would have been the perfect time. But instead he was turned over, and they said, he's making himself king. We have no king but Caesar. So he was actually executed for no reason whatsoever, other than jealousy of their position. So now we go to Acts chapter 6. We're going to get into the testimony of his followers. Acts chapter 6. We'll start in verse 5. And the saying pleased the whole multitude, and they chose Stephen, a man full of faith and of the Holy Spirit, and Philip, and Prochorus, and Nicanor, and Timon, and Parmenas, and Nicholas, a proselyte of Antioch, whom they set before the apostles. And when they had prayed, they laid their hands on them, and the word of Elohim increased, and the number of the disciples multiplied in Jerusalem greatly, and a great company of the priests were obedient to the faith. And Stephen, full of faith and power, did great wonders and miracles among the people. Then there arose certain of the synagogue, which is called the synagogue of the Libertines, and Cyrenians, and Alexandrians, and of them of Cilicia, and of Asia, disputing with Stephen. And they were not able to resist the wisdom and the spirit by which he spake. Then they suborned men which said, We have heard him speak blasphemous words against Moses and against Elohim. I'm going to look up that word suborned real quick. That's 5260 in the Strong's Concordance. 52:6. Oh, I'm in the wrong one. Sorry. Go back here to the Greek. 52:6, 52:60 in the Greek. Hupobalo, from hupo and balo, to throw in stealthily, introduce by collision. So these men came in, and it says, We have heard him speak blasphemous words against Moses and against Elohim. And they stirred up the people and the elders and the scribes, and came upon him and caught him and brought him to the council, and set up false witnesses, which said, This man ceases not to speak blasphemous words against this holy place and the law. Notice it says that they were false witnesses. So they falsely testified that this follower of Yeshua spoke against the holy place and the law. Verse 14. For we have heard him say that this Yeshua of Nazareth shall destroy this place and shall change the customs of Moses delivered us. Again, this is a false accusation saying that he said Yeshua would change the custom of Moses. And all that sat in the council, looking steadfastly on him, saw his face as it had been the face of an angel. And let's skip down a little bit in chapter 7. Now, Stephen goes on and he preaches a real long historical sermon that goes all the way back to Abraham up to the Messiah, and how the Messiah fulfilled the role, Yeshua fulfilled the role of Messiah. And let's pick it up in 51. You stiff-necked and uncircumcised in heart and ears, you do always resist the Holy Spirit, as your fathers did, so do you. Which of the prophets have not your fathers persecuted, and they have slain them, which showed before of the coming of the just one, of whom you have been now the betrayers and murderers, who have received the law by the disposition of angels and have not kept it. So here he's rebuking them for not keeping the law. When they heard these things, they were cut to the heart, and they gnashed on him with their teeth. But being full of the Holy Spirit, looked up steadfastly into heaven, and saw the glory of Elohim, and Yeshua standing on the right hand of Yahweh, and said, Behold, I see the heavens open, and the Son of Man standing on the right hand of Yahweh. Then they cried out with a loud voice, and stopped their ears, and ran upon him with one accord, and cast him out of the city, and stoned him. And the witnesses laid down their clothes at a young man's feet, whose name was Saul. And they stoned Stephen, calling upon Elohim, and saying, Master Yeshua, receive my spirit. And he kneeled down and cried with a loud voice, Yahweh, lay not this sin to their charge. And when he had said this, he fell asleep. That's about the same thing the Messiah did. Forgive them, for they know not what they do. And all of this came about, this stoning of Stephen came about because of a false accusation, claiming that Stephen and Yeshua came to change what Moses wrote. And again, there's a message out there today, claiming that the Messiah changed his Father's word, and that his disciples, his apostles, and Paul were ordained to do the same. But it's not there. Let's go over to, before we go there, let's go back to Deuteronomy 13 real quick, and let's look at what it says, how you're supposed to treat someone who draws you away from the commandments or tries to seduce you to go after other Elohim. Starting in verse 1 of chapter 13, if there arise among you a prophet or a dreamer of dreams, and gives thee a sign or a wonder, and the sign or the wonder come to pass whereof he spake unto thee, saying, Let us go after other mighty ones, which thou hast not known, and let us serve them. Thou shalt not hearken unto the words of that prophet, or that dreamer of dreams, for Yahweh your Elohim proves you to know whether you love Yahweh your Elohim with all your heart and with all your soul. You shall walk after Yahweh your Elohim, and fear him, and keep his commandments, and obey his voice, and you shall serve him, and cleave unto him. And that prophet or that dreamer of dreams shall be put to death, because he hath spoken to turn you away from Yahweh your Elohim, which brought you out of the land of Egypt, and redeemed you out of the house of bondage, to thrust thee out of the way which Yahweh thy Elohim commanded thee to walk in. So shalt thou put the evil away from the midst of thee. If thy brother, the son of thy mother, or thy son, or thy daughter, or the wife of thy bosom, or thy friend, which is in thine own soul, entice thee secretly, saying, Let us go serve other mighty ones, which thou hast not known, thou nor thy fathers, namely of the mighty ones of the people which are round about you, nigh unto thee, or far off from thee, from the end of the earth even unto the other end of the earth. Thou shalt not consent unto him, nor hearken unto him, neither shall thine eye pity him, neither shalt thou spare, neither shalt thou conceal him, but thou shalt surely kill him. Thine hand shall be first upon him to put him to death, and afterwards the hand of all the people. And thou shalt stone him with stones, that he die, because he hath sought to thrust thee away from Yahweh thy Elohim, which brought thee out of the land of Egypt from the house of bondage. And all Israel shall hear and fear, and shall do no more any such wickedness as this is among you. If thou shalt hear say in one of thy cities, which Yahweh thy Elohim hath given thee to dwell there, saying, Certain men, the children of Belial, are gone out from among you, and have withdrawn the inhabitants of their city, saying, Let us go and serve other mighty ones which you have not known. Then shalt thou inquire, and make search, and ask diligently, and behold, if it be true. Basically, are there any witnesses? And the thing certain, that such abomination is wrought among you, thou shalt surely smite the inhabitants of that city with the edge of the sword, destroying it utterly and all that is therein. and the cattle thereof with the edge of the sword, and thou shalt gather all the spoil of it into the midst of the street thereof, and shalt burn with fire the city and all the spoil thereof, every whit, for Yahweh thy Elohim, and it shall be an heap forever. It shall not be built again. And there shall cleave none of the cursed thing to thine hand, that Yahweh may turn from the fierceness of his anger, and show thee mercy, and have compassion upon thee, and multiply thee as he hath sworn unto thy fathers, when thou shalt hearken to the voice of Yahweh thy Elohim, to keep all his commandments, which I command thee this day, to do that which is right in the eyes of Yahweh thy Elohim. So here, he even said, if your next of kin, your family, tried to draw you away from Yahweh and his commandments to serve Elohim, they need to be put to death. So let's go back to Acts. And we can see here, and you can see that theme through the gospel accounts when the Messiah said anything that was contrary to their doctrine or things they didn't like, they want to pick up stones. They want to pick up stones and stone him because it was against their interpretation and their traditions. And then again, we see false witnesses raised up against Stephen. They pick up stones. And the same thing is going to happen to Brother Saul. They're going to pick up stones and accuse him of speaking against Moses. False witnesses. In Acts chapter 8, in verse 1, and Saul was consenting unto his death, the death of Stephen. Why? Because of the false witnesses set up saying that he spoke against Moses and the law, and that Yeshua was going to change things. And at that time there was a great persecution against the assembly, which was at Jerusalem, and they were all scattered abroad throughout all regions of Judea and Samaria, except the apostles. And devout men carried Stephen to his burial, and made great lamentation over him. As for Saul, he made havoc of the assembly, entering into every house, and hauling men and women, committed them to prison. And let's skip over to chapter 9. We see that Paul is going through, he's wreaking havoc on the church because of the false witnesses set up against Yeshua and Stephen. He thought it was his righteous duty to serve Yahweh by putting this evil out of the midst of Israel. But Yeshua had a different plan. In Acts chapter 9, starting verse 1, and Saul, yet breathing out threatenings and slaughter against the disciples of the master, went unto the high priest and desired of him letters to Damascus to the synagogues, that if he found any of this way, whether they were men or women, he might bring them bound unto Jerusalem. And as he journeyed, he came near Damascus, and suddenly there shined round about him a light from heaven, and he fell to the earth, and heard a voice saying unto him, Saul, Saul, why persecutest thou me? And he said, Who art thou, Master? And the Master said, I am Yeshua, whom thou persecute. It is hard for thee to kick against the pricks. And he, trembling and astonished, said, Master, what wilt thou have me to do? And the Master said unto him, Arise and go into the city, and it shall be told thee what thou must do. And the men which journeyed with him stood speechless, hearing a voice, but seeing no man. Let's skip over here to verse 26. And when Paul was come to Jerusalem, he essayed to join himself to the disciples, but they were all afraid of him, and believed not that he was a disciple. So this man is going out persecuting the church and the followers of Yeshua, killing people, putting them in prison because of the false witness saying that they were going to change things, and now all of a sudden he's flipped the script. Now all of a sudden he's a follower of Yeshua. So verse 9. in verse 27. But Barnabas took him and brought him to the apostles and declared unto them how he had seen the master in the way, and that he had spoken to him, and how he had preached boldly at Damascus in the name of Yeshua. And he was with them coming in and going out at Jerusalem. And he spake boldly in the name of the master Yeshua, and disputed against the Grecians, but they went about to slay him. Which when the brethren knew, they brought him down to Caesarea, and sent him forth to Tarsus. Then had the assemblies rest throughout all Judea and Galilee and Samaria, and were edified, and walking in the fear of Yahweh and in the comfort of the Holy Spirit were multiplied. Now let's flip over to Acts chapter 13. And, we can go back and read the story, but for the sake of time, we're going to kind of get to the point here. Acts 13. Starting in verse 14. And when they departed from Perga, they came to Antioch in Pisidia, and went into the synagogue on the Sabbath day and sat down. And after reading of the law and the prophets, the rulers of the synagogue sent unto them, saying, You men and brethren, if you have any word of exhortation for the people, say on. Then Paul stood up, and beckoning with his hand, said, Men of Israel, and you that fear Elohim, give audience. The Elohim of this people of Israel chose our fathers, and exalted the people when they dwelt as strangers in the land of Egypt, and with a high arm brought them out of it. And so here Paul is given another sermon, kind of like Stephen, and he's building up to the coming of the Messiah. And we'll pick up here in verse 37 of chapter 13. But he whom Elohim raised again saw no corruption. He just spoke about the Psalms, the prophecies in the Psalm, and how the Messiah fit those prophecies. Verse 38. Be it known unto you therefore, men and brethren, that through this man is preached unto you the forgiveness of sins, and by him all that believe are justified from all things from which you could not be justified by the law of Moses. Beware therefore lest that come upon you which is spoken of in the prophets. Behold, you despisers, and wonder and perish, for I work a work in your days, a work which you shall in no wise believe, though a man declare it to you. And when the Jews were gone out of the synagogue, and the Gentiles besought that these words might be preached to them the next Sabbath. So, and we'll see that Paul goes in every Sabbath preaching about Yeshua and all things that are in Moses and the prophets. In verse, let's flip over to chapter 14 of Acts. So Paul is speaking again here, and starting in verse 19. And there came thither certain Jews from Antioch and Iconium, who persuaded the people, and having stoned Paul, drew him out of the city, supposing he had been dead. Howbeit, as the disciples stood round about him, he rose up and came into the city, and the next day he departed with Barnabas to Derbe. And when they had preached the good news to that city, and had taught many, they returned again to Lystra and to Iconium and to Antioch, confirming the souls of the disciples, and exhorting them to continue in the faith, and that we must through much tribulation enter into the kingdom of Yahweh. So if you go through the entire story of Paul's ministry, all he is speaking about is the resurrection through Yeshua, and how the Messiah, how Yeshua fit the description of the Messiah. That was his only message. He never said anything against Moses. He never said anything against the changing of Torah or anything like that. And a little later on, we'll see, he says, the only reason I'm standing here, The only reason I'm brought before the judgment seat is because I believe in the resurrection of the dead through Yeshua Messiah. Period. That's the only reason I'm here. Let's flip over to chapter 17 of Acts. Verse 1. Now when they had passed through Amphipolis and Apollonia, they came to Thessalonica, where was a synagogue of the Jews. And Paul, as his manner was, went in unto them, and 3 Sabbath days reasoned with them out of the Scriptures, opening and alleging that Messiah must needs have suffered and risen again from the dead, and that this Yeshua whom I preach unto you is Messiah. That was his message. That was his gospel. That he is the Messiah. He had to die, and through him is forgiveness of sins. Period. That's his message. Continuing on to chapter 18. Verse 1. After these things, Paul departed from Athens and came to Corinth, and found a certain Jew named Aquila, born in Pontus, lately come from Italy, with his wife Priscilla, because that Claudius had commanded all Jews to depart from Rome, and came unto them. And because he was of the same craft, he abode with them, and wrought. For by their occupation they were tent makers. And he reasoned in the synagogue every Sabbath, and persuaded the Jews and the Greeks. Again, he's taken the message to the Jews and the Greeks on the Sabbath, as his custom was. In chapter 18, starting in verse 12. And when Gallio was the deputy of Achaia, the Jews made insurrection with one accord against Paul, and brought him to the judgment seat, saying, This fellow persuades men to worship Elohim contrary to the law. And when Paul was now about to open his mouth, Gallio said unto the Jews, If it were a matter of wrong or wicked lewdness, O you Jews, reason, would that I should bear with you. But if it be a question of words and names, and of your law, look you to it, for I will be no judge of such matters. So these people are standing up saying, Paul is persuading us to worship Yahweh contrary to the law. And we find no evidence of that in Scriptures thus far. And let's flip over to Acts chapter 18, verse 18. And Paul, after this, tarried there yet a good while, and then took his leave of the brethren, and sailed thence into Syria, and with him Priscilla and Aquila, having shorn or shaved his head in Cenchrea, for he had a vow. And some believe that this is the Nazarite vow of Numbers chapter 6, and it was an act to prove that you were devoted to Yahweh. And we'll see this repeated here in just a minute. In Acts chapter 21, we'll be closing out here in just a minute. I know this is a lot of verses, a lot of information. Chapter 21 and verse 18. And the day following, Paul went in with us unto James, and all the elders were present. And when he had saluted them, he declared particularly what things Elohim had wrought amongst the Gentiles by his ministry. And when they heard it, they glorified Yahweh, and said unto him, Thou seest, brother, how many thousands of Jews there are which believe, and they are all zealous of the law. What's amazing here is this man is excited to see the Jewish people believing in Yeshua and being zealous for the law. This is a good thing that they are zealous for the word of Yahweh and they believe in Yeshua. And they are informed of thee that thou teachest all the Jews which are amongst the Gentiles to forsake Moses. There's a rumor going around saying that you are teaching the Jews to disregard Moses and not to circumcise their children, neither to walk after the customs. There's a rumor going around saying that you're speaking against Moses and circumcision and the customs. What is it therefore? The multitude must needs come together, for they will hear that thou art come. Do therefore this that we say to thee. We have 4 men which have a vow on them. Them take and purify thyself with them, and be at charges with them, that they may shave their heads, and all may know that those things whereof they were informed concerning thee are nothing. Do this and prove that that was a lie, that you never spoke against Moses, that you never spoke against the customs or circumcision. This is what you need to do to prove that that is a lie, and that you also walk orderly and keep the law. Prove that you still keep the law. As touching the Gentiles which believe, we have written and concluded that they observe no such thing, except only that they keep themselves from idols and from blood and from strangled and from fornication. Now, this is another one-hit wonder where, oh, the Gentiles only have to do 4 things, and the law, that was for those poor Jewish people that were in bondage to the law. And what it's actually saying is these nations that are coming in, they need to stop doing these things immediately before they come in fellowship as one people under Yeshua. And if you go back to Acts 15, it explains, if you continue to read on, it explains that even these Gentiles will learn from Moses in the synagogues on the Sabbath. And in verse 27 of this chapter, And when the 7 days were almost ended, the Jews which were of Asia, when they saw him in the temple, stirred up all the people and laid hands on him, crying out, Men of Israel, help! This is the man that teaches all men everywhere against the people and the law and this place, and further brought Greeks also into the temple, and hath polluted this holy place. This also false witnesses. In chapter 23 of Acts, starting in verse 1, And Paul, earnestly beholding the council, said, Men and brethren, I have lived in all good conscience before Elohim unto this day. And the high priest Ananias commanded them that stood by him to smite him on the mouth. Then said Paul unto him, Elohim shall smite thee, thou whited wall. For sittest thou to judge me after the law, and command me to be smitten contrary to the law? And they that stood by said, Revile thou Yahweh's high priest? Then said Paul, I knew not, brethren, that he was high priest. For it is written, Thou shalt not speak evil of the ruler of thy people. But when Paul perceived that one part were Sadducees, and the other part Pharisees, he cried out in the council, Men and brethren, I am a Pharisee, the son of a Pharisee, and of the hope of the resurrection of the dead I am called in question. And when he had so said, there arose a dissension between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the multitude was divided. And that's because they had a difference of opinion about the resurrection. Continue on to chapter 24. We're getting close here. Chapter 24, starting in verse 11. Because that thou mayest understand that there are yet but 12 days since I went up to Jerusalem for to worship, and they neither found me in the temple disputing with any man, neither raising up the people, neither in the synagogues nor in the city, neither can they prove the things whereof they now accuse me. But this I confess unto thee, that after the way which they call heresy, so worship I the Elohim of my fathers, believing all things which are written in the law and in the prophets, and have hope towards Elohim, which they themselves also allow, that there shall be a resurrection of the dead, both of the just and the unjust. And herein do I exercise myself to have always a conscience void of offense toward Elohim and toward men. Now after many years I came to bring alms to my nation and offerings, whereupon certain Jews from Asia found me purified in the temple, neither with multitude nor with tumult, who ought to have been here before thee, and object if they had aught against me. Or else, let these same here say, if they have found any evil doing in me, where I stood before the council, except it be for this one voice that I cried standing among them, touching the resurrection of the dead, am I called in question today. So here we see he's saying the only thing that I'm standing here for is in question of the resurrection. He spoke nothing against Moses, the Torah, the prophets, the custom, circumcision, nothing. And that's exactly what they're teaching out there today. They're teaching that Paul, the Messiah, and his followers changed or tried to do away with the Father's word. And let me look at one more verse real quick. And we'll close out here in chapter 28. Starting in verse 19. But when the Jews spake against it, I was constrained to appeal unto Caesar, not that I had aught to accuse my nation of. For this cause, therefore, have I called for you to see you and to speak with you, because that for the hope of Israel I am bound with these chains. What is that hope? The hope of the resurrection. And they said unto him, we neither received letters out of Judea concerning thee, neither any of the brethren that came showed or spake any harm of thee. But we desire to hear of thee what thou thinkest. For as concerning this sect, we know that everywhere it is spoken against. And when they had appointed him a day, there came many to him into his lodging, to whom he expounded and testified the kingdom of Yahweh, persuading them concerning Yeshua, both out of the law of Moses and out of the prophets, from morning till evening. Hallelujah.